good, people? Welcome to Who Knows? It's Just Life, the podcast. I'm your host, Kyle. Thank you for fitting me into your day. On today's episode, I'm going to talk about my thoughts and reaction to the 2020 election. I know that's top of mind for a lot of folks right now. But first, I'm going to get into some brief updates on some other things. What snuck into the news is that as a country, we hit over 100,000 new COVID cases. And that was actually the first time we hit that many new cases in one day in the U.S. so far for COVID. So not a good sign at all as we get into the colder season here. And that was on November 4th. And then again, on the 5th, we had 121,000 cases. So I think on that first day, it was like 107,000 cases. And then we went way above that record and hit 121. And then yesterday on the 6th, we hit 133,000 nationwide. And in here in Maryland, I'm in Maryland, and we had 1,500 new cases yesterday, which is the third most ever. The only time we had more than that in a day was it happened in two other days in May. On the 1st and the 19th, we had a little over 1,700 new cases in one particular day. So, you know, the election has caught everybody's attention, but COVID is still out here. And as of right now, we might be heading for another upsurge nationwide and maybe even locally here. So I'm starting to, pay attention to that as well. Another thing internationally that I noticed is that there's a couple things going on in Ethiopia right now. There's a little bit of drama right now with a dam that they've been constructing on the Nile River. And it's been under construction for almost a decade. And they're actually starting to fill it up and starting to actually utilize that dam and operate it. And it's causing a lot of political issues with the Sudan and Egypt as well, since that dam would allow Ethiopia to control water sources and other resources in the Sudan and Egypt. So Trump actually made some comments about blowing up the dam and stuff like that. So he kind of got his hands in it a little bit, or at least his opinions in it. And another thing in Ethiopia that's happening right now is kind of things are bubbling up into the point where there might be a civil war in the Tigray region, which is kind of like an ongoing thing. That's a group that had power, for a lot of recent history. But then in 2018, they kind of lost power in the 2018 election with the election of the new president. They're getting to the point where things are getting amped up, militarily speaking, and Ethiopia sent troops into the region to try to quell issues there. The Tigray region, they set up their own special election, broke some COVID rules and stuff like that, and Ethiopia isn't recognizing that election. It's almost like they're seceding from the country. So that's another interesting thing that caught my eye, and I'm curious to see how that develops. Hopefully, civil war is avoided, but it's just an interesting development there. On a personal note, and I'm going to get into this probably later, but my dad actually just came back to the States. He actually retired a little early. He's been living in various different countries since he retired. He was in Ecuador. He's been in Nicaragua for a number of years. He was in Guatemala, and most recently he was in the Dominican Republic for a little over a year. And he's planning to go back to Nicaragua, but with Nicaragua right now and COVID, they're not letting non-citizens back in at the time. So he's back in town for the time being, and I'm really excited to have him in town. So and we had a lot of good conversations. So I'm really hoping I'll get him on the podcast and talk about maybe a couple different topics. So stay tuned. Hopefully we'll be able to get him on at some point. So that's something that's going on personally, which is pretty fun. In terms of the election, I mean, I'm just going to jump right in because there's a lot to talk about. Now, kind of a disclaimer is that I'm not a political junkie anymore. I used to be, and I kind of have taken some steps back from being super into all the minutia of politics. I think it's a little bit better for my health these days, but I was heavily involved earlier in my life. Back at the 2004 election, I actually worked as a summer job. I canvassed for the DNC, door to door, raising money for the Redefeat Bush campaign at the time. That was eventually for John Kerry's candidacy against George Bush, which he lost, of course. And so, I was heavily involved in that time. And honestly, I kind of got a little discouraged about the system. I just kind of fell off. I mean, the ability to have true impact and really make substantial change, I really started to lose faith, to be honest. And as I also got more and more engrossed in the deep systemic root of some of the issues that we're experiencing, especially within the Black community. Right after 2004, Katrina hit, and I spent some time in New Orleans after that. And anyway, it's just been a lifelong humbling experience about the effects of politics. It definitely has an impact, but also just the gargantuan task of like actually making change in the system. And I had several years in my life, and I still kind of feel like that only so much change can actually happen in the system. I think a lot of foundational things about the system itself need to change. And that's just, I mean, most people aren't thinking along those lines. So I just kind of get a little desensitized. So anyway, long story short, I'm not going to get all up into too much of the details of of politics itself. And I'm just going to kind of preface my statements by saying I'm not a political junkie the way I used to be. I'm really just kind of reacting as I am right now, with having kind of pulled back from the nuts and bolts and the minutia of politics as much as I used to. So that's kind of a disclaimer. I'm definitely no political expert. So one thing that I wanted to bring up first and foremost in terms of the election that I thought was interesting is a couple of conversations I actually had at work. One of the guys on my team asked to take some time off so he could vote. And I was like, of course, yeah, definitely take some time off. That ask is also very telling about the culture of where I work. And yes, we've been back in the office since about May, and we have pretty much zero flex time policy or whatever. So yeah, this employee literally had to ask for time off away from work, PTO time, to vote. But it just occurred to me how absurd it is that in this country we have to take time off to vote. I mean, and this year it's much more. This year it's less of an issue now because a lot of mail-in ballots were accepted, and you were able to drop ballots off and drop boxes and stuff like that, and polls were open early and things like that. So and that's all because of COVID. So this year was not the worst year in terms of finding time to vote outside of the workday. Although obviously people still had that challenge. So and so then it kind of brought up the whole question of like, why is Election Day on a Tuesday in the first place? And one of the guys in my group was like, the reason Election Day is on a Tuesday is because everybody's in church on Sundays. And by the way, Tuesday became the official date for elections. I think it was like in 1848, 1850, something like that. A long time, quite a ways in history, but not right away in 1776, 1790, when things were really starting out. But because most folks were farmers, and back then you had to be a landowning white male to vote, the presumption was you were in church on Sunday, markets were open on Wednesday, and it took some time to get to polling locations. So Tuesday was the best day because it gave you a day to get there off after Sunday, a day of rest and everything. And then you hopefully had time to get back to the markets on Wednesday. So that's why elections are on Tuesday. Okay. That's not the case for most people, and transportation's a hell of a lot faster now. One thing that's true is that most democratic countries have elections on Saturdays or Sundays, which makes a lot of sense. Most people aren't working on those days anyway. A lot of people still do, but it's just an easier day. It sounds like it'd be an easier day to facilitate elections. There are 9 countries that have elections on working days, and 2 of them have holidays for that, including South Korea and Israel, which I think is interesting. I think that we should definitely have an Election Day holiday, assuming we keep it on Tuesday, because it just is absurd. Why would we have people go to work and everything, have everything be open? And by the way, you also have to do the most important civic duty you have, which is to vote. And I think it should be a holiday, whether it's an election year or not. I mean, obviously, if it's an election year, vote, do your thing. But if it's not, it's Democracy Day. And let's just pat ourselves on the back for participating in this democratic experiment and, have a day off. I also think this is a replacement holiday for a holiday that should absolutely be eliminated, which is Columbus Day. I'm not going to get into that now, but that one needs to go. And in its place, we can have our furniture sales on Election Day, Democracy Day. All right. So now into the 2020 election and I'm primarily going to be speaking about the presidential election here in terms of just like what to do with the choices we have. And I know a lot of people, that that think along the lines that I do would vote for Biden, would not vote for Trump, obviously. But I also know enough people that would question whether or not that's actually the right vote to make. Biden obviously has a imperfect record and an imperfect legacy when it comes to policies and an impact on the black community. He was definitely involved with the crime bill, obviously, in '94. And just in general, he hasn't always been somebody who got racial issues. A lot of times when he responds to questions about race, he answers with broad brush policies that would impact a lot of people, like, healthcare for all would help black people, helping fight poverty would help black people, whatever. He speaks in generalities, and that's a tactic that a lot of white liberals use. So I'm not all that surprised that he does that, but obviously he's not the candidate that myself and other black people, would immediately gravitate towards and get excited about by any stretch of the imagination, because he just doesn't really speak to us any more than anybody else does. And of course, Biden choosing Kamala Harris as his running mate was a huge moment as well. Of course, she's the first black woman and first Indian American woman to be on a presidential ticket as a vice president. And so there's a lot of history there too. But again, she's also not somebody that she's, well, a lot of people would get excited about her just because she's black. She also was a prosecutor, and that kind of complicates her relationship to the black community to an extent, because, obviously the criminal justice system is flawed. It's unjust and linked to slavery and all that. So, her being a prosecutor on that side of the law is problematic to, in its own right. And now, granted, I've looked into some of what she did there. She did what she had to do to kind of hold that job with integrity and do what she needed to do. She did try to do some changes from the inside, from what I could tell. And I don't think there was a lot of, I don't think she had a lot of impact on those, but I don't think she was trying to be a villain by being a prosecutor. So I don't know. At the end of the day, from what I've heard and what I've read from places, activists, people on the street don't agree with all the things that she did and all the things that she says. But she is somebody that you could work with. And I think that says something. I mean, considering that Trump is not somebody that seems like a lot of people can work with. So I'd rather vote in somebody who I could work with than somebody, even if I disagree with them, than somebody that won't even listen to me. So that says a lot. But another thing that has come up is just the idea of like protest voting, and I know that came up, with Hillary Clinton's campaign and all that. I don't know. I think in any other election, and this really depends on the state you live in. I'm in Maryland. Maryland's almost pretty much always a blue state. So if I wanted to make a statement, about not being wild about Biden, I don't know that doesn't necessarily have the biggest impact in a state like Maryland, but in states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, any state that's anywhere close to being a swing state, this is not the time, I don't think, to be protest voting. I know one strategy that's been talked about is like vote on every other issue on your ballot, except for president, if that's the candidate if those are the candidates that you don't really mess with. And that idea is basically to just, prevent them from thinking that you're just going to blindly accept the candidate that they throw at you, whereas you can still show that you are active and you're voting and you're taking part in your local elected officials and all that, but you're just not, a fan of those two candidates, because that's essentially what it comes down to. And so I don't know. I think that's an interesting take, but I don't think this is the election to play that game. The stakes are too high. Trump has been just so divisive and so bad, obviously, that I just don't think we can play. I don't think we have time, and I don't think we can afford to play around with that. But I also think that Trump, Biden and Harris being not the easiest to agree with. I don't think I don't think they were most people's favorites to win or to even be on a ticket in the early stages of the Democratic primary. So I think a lot of people are like, okay, these are acceptable candidates, but we don't really agree with them 100%, and we're gonna have to push them, which is actually prefer. I like that, because I think that when Obama was elected, everybody was just like, great, we love this guy, and a lot of and especially with the Congress he had for the majority of his presidency, most folks just wanted to defend Obama because he had a difficult time with the way the Republicans, handled him and everything like that, or tried to handle him. And so a lot of people just many people chose to just defend him and give him the benefit of the doubt as to trying hard and doing what he could do. And criticizing Obama, while I did in cases, and I know a lot of other people did too, it wasn't a very popular thing to do because, at the end of the day, people wanted to just support him and have him and just let him be as effective as he could be, understanding what the challenges he was up against. With Biden and Harris, they don't inspire the same automatic support that Obama did, and I think that's healthy for us as a people because we're going to need to push them. And one thing that comes to mind with that is I remember reading about how A. Philip Randolph and the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, he spoke to FDR at length about all the issues that were affecting the folks in his union, but really the black community as a whole. And FDR basically was like, you got to make me do it. And it kind of, I kind of understand a president saying that because at the end of the day, the president is the president of the entire United States, and the issues that prop up, issues that are things that are made issues, are the ones that he deals with. Now, presidents can make up their own issues. Presidents can choose what issues they're going to bring to the forefront. And I really think that FDR's answer in that case highlights how inactive he was from a racial standpoint. And because any president could have chosen to take that up as an issue on their own without being forced to by the masses. A. Philip Randolph took that advice and wanted to plan a march on Washington and do all that, which obviously didn't really happen so much later. But he took that message and said, all right, fine, we'll get grassroots, we'll activate, we'll be active and make things happen, which he spent his lifetime doing. And then you see the rest of FDR's legacy in terms of the GI Bill and all. There's so many parts of the New Deal that were racist, either inherently in their coding and their writing, or just in the implementation, in the sense that the power of distributing and carrying out the various parts of the New Deal were done locally, and local in the South and anywhere where there's any kind of racial anything meant disenfranchisement at a large scale. So FDR kind of let that happen. So obviously race wasn't his big issue, and he clearly just let local people take care of what he was trying to do as a country, which ultimately helped the country as a whole get out of the Depression. And I had this argument with my grandfather occasionally, every once in a while too. Those were racist policies. Yes, they were good for America as a whole, but black people, as usual, were left out intentionally. And I say so intentionally because, again, he told A. Philip Randolph, make me do it. He didn't say, you know what, you're right, and I'm gonna do it without being forced to. He said, you got to force me to do it, which, I don't know. Other presidents didn't take that same attitude with various things, especially, not in racial things sometimes too. So, yeah. So in this election, I definitely think, everybody always says lesser of two evils. I know people weren't all the most excited about Hillary Clinton either. And in a case like this, with Trump being as bad as he's proven to be, and with COVID literally killing people, and as I said at the top of the show, COVID is hitting us harder now than it's ever hit us before, as a country for sure. And in Maryland, who knows, we might eclipse the highest number of cases we've ever had in the coming days. So this is a real thing. This is killing people, and that's also killing people at a disproportionate rate from a racial standpoint as well. So we have to truly think about that as one of the most pressing issues that's happening right now. And Biden and Harris are gonna be better at handling that, in my opinion. So I don't know. And the other thing I want to touch on is kind of the way the election process was taken and the rhetoric that was thrown around during the election. You had Trump talking about, call it on election day, like, we're going to call it then. And he claimed victory on the night of the election, knowing darn well that a lot of votes still had to be counted. And, we saw Michigan and Wisconsin flip, which was huge. And then early Friday morning, it looked like Pennsylvania and Georgia might flip as well. And then on Saturday, they officially called Pennsylvania for Biden-Harris, which put them above the 270 needed. So they officially won it Saturday, which was huge, of course. And there was never any statement from the Trump campaign, Trump himself, nor the campaign. And so, I get, and I know he's going to contest it. He's not going to go away easily, I don't think. But that's the result that we have. And, I think I think that's a good move for the country. Definitely not perfect. And I think most people are activated because the Democratic primary had such a diverse panel that so many people saw themselves in other candidates other than Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. So I think there's gonna be a healthy push for both of them to do the things that they wanted that weren't necessarily reflected in each of their primary campaigns. So I think that's ultimately a healthy move for the country. Another thing that came out is all the rhetoric around violence. I know a lot of people, a lot of downtown businesses were boarding up windows and whatnot. And I personally was like, man, is this are we really worried about this? Are we really going to have a non-peaceful transition? And it might have been early because I think, it might take some time before people to really activate. If they choose to be violent, it might take some time for that to be activated, especially as Trump's legal stuff might wane, his suing and trying to contest the election, as that wanes, if he really still tries to amplify, a resistance to being voted out, I mean, things might pop off at some point, and that is terrifying. And I remember seeing clips of people were chanting like something about like stop counting votes and stuff like that. I'm like, it's just insane to me that people are actually like, hey, we're done counting votes. Like, oh, what's up with these votes being counted? And I just don't understand how in a democracy or in a country who claims that democracies are one of our greatest assets and our freedom, that you would want to not count votes that come in. That's just absurd to me. And so, yeah, I don't know. And some of those crowds looked ominous, right? And, it reminded me of something I learned about this summer. I can't remember which book. It might have been in both, but I was reading Henry Louis Gates' Stony the Road, and I was reading From Here to Equality by Sandy Darity and Kirsten Mullen. And one or both of those books mentioned the Ocoee Massacre in Florida back in 1920, which is literally 100 years ago, when the records of this incident are very vague, but basically between 30 and 50 people, black people, were killed in a massacre that basically ensued based on black people trying to vote in the presidential election that year in Florida. That's, I think, the bloodiest election day in the United States history. It was around black people trying to vote. That's what it was. And I mean, these days, there's a lot of nonviolent ways that they try to stop us from voting. Of course, there's a bunch of, all these kind of, voter ID laws and all these kind of things that they try to, put out there to try to make it harder to vote. Lower, shorter hours, less numbers of polling locations, stuff like that. So those tactics, that sentiment is still live. It's not necessarily violent, although some of those crowds look violent. I know there was some footage of some folks in Arizona talking about we want war or whatever. Terrifying for sure. I really hope that nothing like that actually pops off. But seeing those crowds though just shows me that a lot of things haven't changed that much in terms of like the core. Like at the core, people are still pretty are racist. They're still racist. They're still, bigoted about their own opinions and their vote mattering, and whoever's votes haven't been counted yet for whatever reason, those votes shouldn't matter. And obviously that in that moment it didn't turn violent, but they've done that in the past. And in Florida, in Ocoee, Florida, up until 1920, I saw this map that showed how the black population had kind of, gained in number, gained in prosperity, not unlike Rosewood, not unlike Tulsa, not unlike other Black Wall Street type towns. And that election, they were voting in 1920, and after the massacre, there were additional intimidation effects. There were things being thrown into people's homes, explosives being thrown into people's homes months later, just to continue that intimidation. And a lot of folks, left over the next 5 years. I think it was by 1925, a lot of the black folks in Ocoee had left, And they sold their property or just left and took losses because of just the fear. Literally terrorism. It's actual terrorism forced them to leave. And they were refugees in their own country. Like we use these terms when we think about international policies and practices and stuff like that. This is in our country. Black people trying to vote suffered against terrorism and were refugees. That's what that was. And I saw one number where it said the land value of the value of the land that they left is depending on how you calculate the number. But the number they showed was potentially millions of dollars worth of land that they left or forced to sell in duress, and because of terrorism. And all they were trying to do was vote. So anyway, that's what this country has been about. And I know in the Voting Rights Act in 1965 was supposed to amend that, but we still see the same things today. And I'm just glad that nothing turned violent on Election Day, and they haven't turned violent since. And I hope nothing ever does turn violent about this election. You know, fingers crossed. We're gonna hold tight and see how it all turns out. But yeah. So in general, in terms of the election, I'm not excited about how it went down. I'm really not. I'm saddened, I guess, by how contentious it was, how divisive it was, and honestly, how close it was. Really, like I wish as American people, I wish this wasn't this close. I really wish it wasn't. And it's disheartening that this many people. I mean, more people voted for Trump than voted for Obama too. I mean, I know both of them broke that record. So to me, it's just this country is something else. I'm gonna tell you what. But at the end of the day, Biden and Harris declared victors, and I think that they're a healthy ticket because they can try to unify the country, and the Democrats and the left, like I said earlier, are not just going to blindly accept them and say, "Oh yeah, cool. Just as long as you're not Trump, do whatever you want." No, I think people are activated and they're ready to push. Like A. Philip Randolph was challenged to do. I think we're ready to make them do the things that maybe they weren't ready to articulate in the primaries or whatever. I think we're going to help get them there, hopefully, and make some real positive changes take place. So the next piece that I want to talk about is my social media journey. I know that's something that I've been talking about for a little bit. And so I as I mentioned last time, I expanded the number of people I'm following, and it's definitely entertaining. It's definitely a good source of information. I mentioned last time how like I got some information about maintaining beards and stuff. So that's been good. And so one thing, I actually did do some DMs with a buddy from college I haven't talked to in years. So reconnected with him, which was pretty cool. I made a couple of posts. I posted some stuff about voting, and and I also learned, like, I thought it would be easier. Like in Twitter, it's pretty easy. You see somebody's tweet and you literally just retweet it. It's like, you don't have to, like, it's not very hard to do. But in Instagram, you have to like screenshot what somebody else posted and then repost it or add it to your story or whatever, which to me just seemed like a little bit extra work than I was anticipating. I thought it'd be easier to do that, but I don't know. People were like, it's not that serious. I'm like, it's not, but it could also be easier. But anyway, so that was an interesting learning process. But really, this was an interesting time to be on social media because there was a lot of great stuff on social media. I know between Twitter and Instagram, there's a lot of talented folks out there. And just creatively capturing the sentiments of right now. I saw one person posted, something like, "Hey, all lives matter, all votes matter. Sincerely yours," or whatever. I thought that was hilarious. And I know I saw this other one where I think it was a tweet. It said something like, "Phew, now we can back to the old racism I grew up with," or something like that, which I thought was hilarious. I was dying laughing when I saw that because I don't know. It's Trump was on another level, and again, like Biden had his own share of white supremacy in terms of the crime bill and stuff. So I mean that's just a fact, So there's definitely some old ills that will hopefully rectify this go around with Biden. And I gotta say, the craziest thing I saw was Twitter basically rewrote Nicki Minaj's verse on that song Monster. And then a woman like was screen recording and like delivered the remixed lyrics, and like recorded herself doing it. And it was flawless. I mean, flawless. Like, I was thoroughly impressed. First of all, that Twitter is just like that hip, and they just kind of like fell in line and like rewrote that verse like line by line, which was just like amazing. And you see, like, Black Twitter, I keep hearing about Black Twitter. Yo, props to Black Twitter. That was dope. And then for the woman to just like to actually perform it and deliver it. I think she even used the beat to deliver it. I mean, I was just fire. I was like, that just took the cake for me. I was like, man, this is crazy. People are out here talented. And yeah, I was just very, very excited to see all that. All right, so now the song I'm rocking to. The song I'm rocking to right now is Big Crit's Mixed Messages. This is a song that's been out for a while, but I really bang with it, and I think it's very relevant right now, because he just speaks to conflicts that we all, I feel like, have in our lives and in our hearts, for real. So I'm gonna quote a couple of the lines here. I got a whole lot of mixed messages in my songs. Am I wrong to feel this way? Revolutionary, although I'm free. I got me a lover, but I still want to cheat. I want to be safe, but it's F the police. I don't want to be here, but I'm too scared to leave. And so, yeah, I think that's heavy. I mean, there's a lot in there. He kind of highlights his own, am I wrong to feel these conflicts? He talks about having a lover, but he still wants to cheat. And I know, that's a huge topic. And trust, we will get into that. I know we're gonna have some relationship talks and talk about monogamy, non-monogamy, all that kind of stuff, because that all was real interesting to me. But yeah, like, I mean, you got a lover, you got your person, you got, the person you're committed to or whatever. And, hey, you see somebody you're interested in, there's some kind of an energy that you feel with some other person. And it's like, hey, I kind of want to explore that. And most people's relationship situations don't condone that in any stretch. So that's a conflict that people have. I want to be safe, but it's F the police. And it's like, yeah, I mean, everybody's on some F the police stuff right now. Most people are like, hey, like, man, of course, with police brutality and all the other ways that the police have been weaponized against us, whether it's, drugs or loitering or, traffic violations, whatever, it's F the police, because it's like, and again, there's a lot going on in terms of like defunding the police, reworking how police operate, police accountability. There's a lot of different ideas out there in terms of what we need to do. I mean, another great concept too is police is law enforcement. Some laws could be unjust. So by enforcing the laws, they are enforcing injustice. That's another angle that needs to be looked at as well. But if you flip that around to where we are literally right now, if Trump does not leave office, willingly, or does not concede the election and even slightly hints at, fighting this election result, and, his little stand back and stand by becomes an activate, in that moment, we are going to want to be safe, and we are going to call on police, the National Guard, and I don't know who else, the military itself, I don't know, to protect us from that, whatever that is and whatever that looks like. I mean, in a case like that, we are gonna want some law and order on our side in terms of enforcing this election to go down the way it took place, and to make sure that anybody who thinks otherwise does not take to violence or any kind of other means to prevent it from happening. So yeah, I just think that line is just super deep and super honest. I mean, yeah, like I said, a lot of people are on the F the police right now, but in the next few months, we are probably going to want them to be as brave as they can be to make sure that nothing stupid pops off if 45 kind of starts to insinuate any more violence. So that's the heavy line there too. And then the last part of it is, I don't want to be here, but I'm too scared to leave. And I know when Trump was first elected in 2016, a lot of people, myself included, were like, man, if Trump gets elected, I'm leaving this here country. And we were lying. I'm still here. I didn't leave. But the sentiment was like, man, how could we have elected this guy as the president of the United States? And that line could also even be true on a local level. You might be in a situation locally, whether it's in your home, a neighborhood, a type of situation. You want to be you don't want to be there, but there's a fear of leaving. There's a lot of fear in leaving, whether because you got family nearby or something like that, or you just got support systems and you don't want to leave because of some other things. And in a case of like a large issue like the country, like, yeah, it's crazy. It's scary to move to another country. It takes a lot to do that, especially if, cultural differences, potentially language differences, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I've heard of a few black people who've done so with flying colors and have been heavily successful in other parts of the world. But in general, that's a big undertaking, right? So definitely not something to be taken lightly. But I get the sentiment of being like, man, I'm not trying to be here. But thankfully, hopefully the election has people a little bit more hopeful in terms of what this country is going to look like in the next few years. So, yeah. The song I'm rocking to is Big Crit, Mixed Messages. I'm going to post it on the social media, and I'm going to post it on the liner notes for the show, so you can check out that song. It's super dope. All right, well, that is the show. As always, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at RealDadult, RealDadult. I look forward to hearing from you. Please hit me up and give me any comments about the show, anything else you'd like to discuss. If you have any follow-up thoughts or comments, I'd love to hear them. But yeah, thank you for rocking with me. I hope to catch your ear next time. Until then, be safe, be well. Peace.